Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to this panel discussion on perspectives on power dynamics and racial equity in architecture. My name is Alexis Gregory, and I'm an associate professor at Mississippi State University and the current chair of the ACSA Education Committee. This panel discussion was organized by the members of the Education Committee, and I would like to thank all of them for their hard work over this semester. The members of the committee are Elgin Cleckley, Jeff Day, Anna Giaras, Patricia Morgado, Mark Pearson, Shaheen Rudibari, I apologize, Malini Srivastava, and Sarah Takatatsu. I would also like to thank Danielle Dent, the ACSA staff member, who's also part of the Education Committee and has been instrumental in coordinating this panel discussion. Thank you as well to the 4 panelists who have agreed to spend this Tuesday evening with us and for sharing their perspectives. I would now like to turn the panel discussion over to Sarah Takatatsu, who will be moderating the panel this evening.
Thank you so much, Alexis. Thank you all so much for joining. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation today. To introduce myself, hi everyone, I am Sarah Takatatsu. I am the current Vice President of the American Institute of Architecture Students, as well as the Student Director on the ACSA Board of Directors. So wearing a few hats and of course serving on the Education Committee, which has been such a joy, and really happy that we get to bring this forward to you all today. So as noted in the chat, please post questions as they go. The structure of this will be pretty simple. We'll do a round of introductions, a round of really quick pre-thought presentations from our panelists, and then we'll jump into an open conversation with everyone. So we'll go in the order of Carmina, Udo, Emily, and Verche, and we'll start off there for quick introductions.
Hello, I'm Carmina Sanchez del Valle. I'm professor of architecture at Hampton University in Virginia, and my role is to present the faculty perspective, a faculty perspective.
Hi everyone, my name is Udo Anadobu. I am a sophomore in the undergraduate program at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, and I'm here for the student perspective.
Hi, my name is Emily Parsons, and I'm the Director of Student Affairs at Tulane University, and I'm here to present a perspective from education and experiences in student affairs.
Hi everyone, I'm Verche Height. I am a licensed architect at Science Architecture in North Carolina. I am also a lecturer at NC State University, and I am here to present or give the perspective from the professional.
Fantastic. Again, thank you all for being here. As you can tell, we have a powerhouse of amazing women and professionals here. So I think we'll get a lot out of this conversation. And to start us off, Carmina will give our first 5 to 7 minute presentation. So take it away, Carmina.
Thank you. So I definitely want to repeat this again. Thank you to the ACSA Education Committee for inviting me to participate and for creating the space for this conversation. And I am presenting a faculty perspective, and I'm not necessarily representing the views of the university where I work or the department where I teach. These are my views based on my experiences. Hampton University is in Virginia and is an HBCU. It was founded in 1868 to educate Black people that up to that point were not allowed to go to school. That is, after the Civil War. The town and the campus are on what was Kigotan territory. It's a very, very ancient place of settlement for human beings. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, where I studied architecture at the University of Puerto Rico. I completed doctoral studies in architecture at the University of Michigan, and it is in Puerto Rico that I am a registered architect. There are more Puerto Ricans living in the US mainland than in the island. Puerto Ricans who are born and raised in the continental US may have a different living experience than mine. Spanish is my first language. I dwell in Spanish. We share cultural perspective, traditions, and heritage. We are children of mixed, hybrid, syncretic culture. As a student in Ann Arbor, I became other. Often when making a transaction, I was asked to show my green card. Often was asked, when did I arrive in the United States? Many people don't know that Puerto Rico is a territory of the US and has been so since 1898, when the US military forces took possession of the island. To simplify, I say I'm Hispanic, I'm Latina. In the continental US, my name and accent mark me as from somewhere else. I am ethnic, foreign. I am a person of color, a woman of color. Sorry, my voice is trembling. This is the first time that I get to say this to people outside my colleagues. I work in a university, and as you know, these are places where ideas are considered, researched, and debated. Universities are safe places to do so. Policies and procedures are in place to ensure that they are. They are organizations made of people. I am a woman that teaches in an architecture program, one of a small percentage of women that has attained the rank of full professor and that has been honored with the ACSA Distinguished Professor Award. This is thanks to the support and mentorship of many through the years. Statistics indicate that as a woman, I have an unequal access to resources. I am a faculty member. We have power to do, to assess, to approve, to participate, to collaborate, to be part of, to acknowledge, to accept, to engage, to facilitate, to help, to support, to encourage, to open doors, to invite, to pull in. We have power to ignore, to dismiss, to turn down, to delete, to close doors, to drive away. We have power on the content of what we teach, on how we teach it, and the language that we use. We have power on shaping the environment where we teach and on the policies that guide assessment, recruitment, and retention. We all have biases, and it is necessary to know what they are. Code switching is not easy. In the 1990s, when I started teaching affirmative action, policies were discussed often. Some resisted them and complained about having to be PC. In the 2000s, there were challenges to affirmative action, just as there are now. Somehow we entered a post-racial period. The issue was diversity. In the last 5 years, attention has been placed on inclusiveness and equity. Very recently, justice. There is awareness and empathy after much insistence. It is possible to learn to support each other, to change oneself. Doing so is the start of a much wider, meaningful transformation. Thank you.
So much, Carmina. That was beautiful. Udo, we'll have you go next.
Well, hi, everyone. I just want to say that I'm really excited to be here. This is my first time speaking on a panel of any sort because, I'm a sophomore in college. So, yeah, I was really excited when I got the email asking to talk about power dynamics and social justice and equality because I'm a huge advocate for that, especially on this campus. I'm a student leader for the Social Justice and Equality Task Force. And from the beginning of my journey in architecture, I knew that it was going to be hard because architecture is a field made for white males. It's not really made for women. It's definitely not made for minority women. So from the jump, I came to college knowing that I was going to do everything I can to make the space that I'm in more comfortable for myself, but also more comfortable for people who are like me. So that's what I'm doing now on campus, and hopefully, this talk is just one stepping stone in making that happen. So yeah, like I said, I started my journey in architecture when I was in high school. So I took a civil engineering and architecture course my junior year of high school, and I was the only girl in my class, and I was the only Black girl, but definitely the only girl. And that was my first eye-opening experience into realizing yeah, this is going to be a long ride, to get where I want to be. And it was hard because we always have to do group projects and stuff. And, the guys, they like to goof off. It was a little boys club, and any group I was in, they'll make me do all the work and blah, blah, blah. But my junior year, I entered the ACE mentor program downtown in Chicago. And for any of you who are unfamiliar with it, it's a program that pairs high school students with practicing professionals in the ACE disciplines, which is architecture, construction, engineering. So coming from the suburbs, like I would take a train down once a week. And then my junior year, I would go to the Perkins and Will office downtown. And I was the only like Black female from my school who would go with our group. And our group was split into 2 different teams. So one team would go to SOM, one team would go to Perkins and Will. And yeah, I was also like the only, well, one of 3 juniors. The other 2 junior guys, like they didn't really take it that seriously. It was like a fun time for them. But yeah, I was, a little intimidated initially going in, having to speak up about the group project that we were in and trying to just get my voice out there and like let everybody know that like I had ideas and like my ideas were good and like I deserved to be there and all that kind of stuff. Like I used to be really shy, but not really anymore. So yeah, that's what ACE taught me. And then moving on from there, like that was just like, one step in my journey to figuring out what I wanted to do in architecture and how I wanted to use my experience to like design a better environment for everybody else who looked like me and for everybody else around me. So yeah, I'm just so grateful for that experience because I got to see, how people work in like the real world, not just like in school where they make us read about people. But anyways, when I went to college, I already knew what the professional field was like. So I was like, all right, I'm not clueless. Like a lot of freshmen go into the architecture program clueless. Like they don't really know what architecture is, but they feel like they want to do it because, they played with Legos or like they did Minecraft or they like to draw or something like that. But I knew like what the professional field was like. So I knew, I would have to put the work in. I knew like model making and all that kind of stuff. But it was still a lot different than I anticipated because there's a lot of privilege that goes into being an architect major. Like just the fact that, you work on these super long projects and your professors anticipate that you'll spend all your time in studio. And, that's fine because everybody is in the same class, everybody has the same experience, but it's different when you're a minority or a female because number one, like my parents aren't super rich. So like when we had to start building models and buying materials, I was that one person like, oh my gosh, like where am I gonna get the money to buy chipboard or like, where am I gonna get the money to buy acrylic or like laser print or any of that kind of stuff. And, everybody else, like they can just go into Blackline and like buy all the materials, come back, cut it up, put their models together. Like there's privilege that comes with that. And I feel like that's one thing that's a bit overlooked. I don't want to say that the university overlooks it so much, like there are obviously resources for that, but in architecture, the field in general, like that's one thing that isn't collectively thought of, like where are students going to be coming up with the funds, the time to do this. And like one of my friends, another Black girl, she had a work study. So she used to have to go to work right after studio, which ended at like 5 o'clock. So now from 5 o'clock to like 8 o'clock, she's at work and then she has to go back and do her homework, which takes another like 5 hours. Then she has to learn an entirely new program and, she's staying up until 3 a.m. And that messes up with you, mentally, emotionally, like trying to figure out how to do this when everybody else is like having a grand time, like figuring it out and like coming up with these really amazing designs. It's not like her ideas were bad. It's just she didn't know how to put it on paper. And then don't even get me started with reviews. Reviews is a whole different thing. But like, I don't mind reviews personally. Like I'm perfectly fine with being critiqued, but like at the same time, there is privilege that comes with being able to sit through a critique and like just be able to move on afterwards. Like some people put in so much effort, so much time into their designs. Like they always teach us not to get super attached, but like you can't help it, honestly. I don't know one person who doesn't get attached to their designs, even I do. So, it's a whole different world out there for students who have struggles coming in, not just like students who realize that, oh, this is, a really hard field. This is harder than I anticipated. Like people can know exactly what they're walking into and still struggle. So I think, once I came to college, once I went through my freshman year, I was like, all right, there's some changes that need to be made. So got to work, made a few emails, made a few calls, and, You know, Francisco can attest, I'm not shy about emailing professors, emailing the director of the entire school to set up a call to speak my mind, but not everybody has that agency. Even I have privilege when it comes to that. And that's something that we don't talk about enough. There's so many intersectionalities that go into a person, and we're not just designing buildings. Like, that doesn't make sense. Architects design buildings, yes, but like, we design for people. So why is it so hard for us to understand other people? We don't take the time to do that enough. And as much as ignorance is bliss, we have to understand that there's privilege in everything that we do. Everything that we do has a meaning. My mentor, there's a line that stuck with me, like to this day. She said, every line that you make, every wall that you build, every brick that you lay has a meaning, has a purpose. It affects somebody. You know, there are externalities. There's a third party effect to every decision you make in design, in education, and even in your social life. So I feel like as a collective field, you know, I feel like we should take steps to consider that, to learn about that, you know, to check our privilege every step of the way and to do better. Thank you.
So powerful, and so much amazing insight. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions after more presentations. So thank you so much. Next up, we'll have Emily.
Good evening again. Carmina made such I wanted to kind of echo her statement that the perspective that I bring is definitely mine, and you know, it perhaps varies from many other experiences, but just kind of wanted to say that. I'd also like to thank ACSA for inviting me to participate in this panel. Like, I think almost all of our other panelists, this is my first one of this, and I'm really excited to be here for it. So I've worked in architectural education in varying capacities for the last 10 years. I started in this role after receiving my Bachelor of Architecture degree, and as my role evolved with students, I decided to pursue a master's in education with an emphasis on student affairs. With the combination of my own experiences as an architecture student and the expertise I gained through my degree, I currently am privileged to hold a position that is focused on student support through the architectural education experience. In this capacity, I'm privy to issues and concerns that arise from multiple perspectives. Through student meetings, I learn about the issues our students face As part of the administration, I'm exposed to curriculum, hiring, and strategy concerns. And as an instructor and an intermediary between faculty and students, I learn about issues that arise for the faculty in regards to student performance and behavior. The combination of all of these perspectives allows me to approach complex problems from a variety of angles. Student concerns can be approached from a more nuanced and sometimes personal perspective, while still taking into account the learning objectives of curriculum and professional needs of practice. Faculty issues are addressed with an understanding of cognitive and developmental needs of students, as well as personal factors affecting their performance. And administrative issues can be resolved from a student advocacy perspective, and while still adhering to the mission, vision, and values of the school. In all of these positions, student learning, development, and experience remains the center of the conversation for me. What do our students need to create a learning environment that is conducive to professional development and personal growth? How do we ensure an equitable experience for all students so they might enter professional practice as well-rounded, knowledgeable, critical thinkers who are going to bring insight and innovation to the built environment? Instead of speaking about my own experience in architecture school, I'd like to discuss the various conversations that I've had over the last decade with students that come to me for advising or personal advice. In particular, one of the most common issues that arises has to do with the perceived or actual personal relationship with the studio professor. This byproduct of the master apprentice pedagogy that architectural education has known for centuries often results in an unequal power dynamic that affects the student negatively. While there are many benefits to this guided, interactive faculty-student development of a project, what happens when that power dynamic shifts from one of collaboration to a more subservient student role? Often hear from students that they had to change their project to make their instructor happy, to ensure that they got a good grade. This can result in a checkbox mentality, and as well as frustration. This removes the opportunity for critical thinking and new knowledge creation on the part of the student. When considering this potentially problematic result in the master-apprentice relationship, one must take into account the unequitable experience this might create for our students of color. With a lack of representation in architecture faculty and the tendency of cultural self-replication brought to the forefront, we must ask ourselves if the development of these personal relationships or even creates an even further imbalance of power for some students. When architecture students do not see themselves in their faculty members, and a lack of education and unconscious or conscious bias on the part of the faculty come together, we can see a glaringly obvious potential for inequitable instruction. We can see a faculty-student relationship that could be rife with tension and frustration, inevitably damaging a student's ability to learn and grow as a designer. So what is the solution? For me, the solution is a far more diverse representation in architecture faculty, bias training and education on critical race theory, and a renewed emphasis on independent student learning and motivation that is anchored in self-critique and critical investigation skills. Each of these components begin in architectural education. An increase in diversity in faculty means that we must increase the diversity of our student population. Schools must better support students of color before, during, and after their education. We can accomplish this, I believe, by placing an emphasis on knowing who our students are, knowing them as developing learners, knowing them as active participants in our world, and knowing the various identities and how that affects the lens in which they view the world. Bias training for faculty, staff, and administrators, and students is a starting point in this journey and should be a mandatory exercise in all schools of architecture. Critical race theory asks us to examine the educational experience with the understanding that racism is part of our culture and how that has affected the effect that fact has had on systemic and institutional inequalities. When we view architectural education from this perspective, we see a field that is dominated historically by white men. The effect that this singular identity has taken on practice, curriculum, precedent, and experience is profound. The lack of diverse voices in the education of an architect results in a significant portion of architecture students who feel that their education does not represent their own lived experiences and limits their ability to engage in the exercise of considering new perspectives and new departure points. That's it.
Thank you so much. And especially thank you for a unique perspective that we don't always hear about from the advisor side. So thank you so much. And very much so, not last and not least, but last, Brashay Heights. We are so excited to hear from our last panelist before we jump into an open discussion. And I can tell everyone is really excited. Feel free to start putting in your questions now so that we can get right into your all questions. So Brashay, please.
Hi everybody. I actually requested going last because I thought it would take a little pressure off, but of course these are wonderful and amazing statements that you've all heard, so I'm just excited to be able to follow it up. As many have said before, the opinions that I represent are my own, so I think that's just very important to emphasize. So again, my name is Brashay Height. I am a licensed architect in North Carolina, and I like to start with that because when I got licensed, I believe I was the 11th or 12th Black woman to become licensed in North Carolina. So I always tell people, stick with it because you can still make history. I am a graduate of UNC Charlotte. That's where I got my undergraduate degree. And I'll just touch really quickly on my, my academic background. I had to do my 5th year project. It was a 5-year program, and the decision was to decide what project you want to do. So I had a professor kind of like approach me and suggest that I do a project that was focused around hip hop architecture. You know, and this is after being involved in the school for about 4 years. At the time, I'd just gotten back actually from a month or so long study from China. So I was really more interested in how culture of that particular country was going to shape architecture. Sort of peeling back that layer of Western think with design, of implied paternalism of sorts, and really kind of like digging into a different cultural perspective. So I wanted to explore the exercise of me as a young Black girl studying architecture in the United States, sort of taking on the challenge of designing this building that was supposed to be representative somehow of another country that I didn't come from. Because I think that's something in practice that happens quite a bit. And those are the things that we have to learn how to do in a way, and more from a perspective of service, I think, than a perspective of authorship. But anyway, point being, to know me at the time was to know that my interest was more in exploring in that realm and less in a hip hop realm. So I, politely declined and ended up doing a project on, that was a Chinese embassy. So and I'm glad I did that, because what that did was inspire me to get my master's degree at the University of Westminster in London. And they had a program which was called the Master of Architecture, Cultural Identity and Globalization, which was phenomenal. I had a group of classmates where each of us was from a different country. So for, I guess, the first time in my education and in my career, I wasn't the minority, and it was an interesting dynamic because there was no minority, because we were all from a different place. So it was just an amazingly diverse and rich, idea-filled, exciting experience. And through that, we collectively had projects where we had to study London, we had to study Israel and Palestine and the diaspora communities in London. And then for our thesis, we had a chance to actually decide what we wanted to do, of course. And the interesting thing was that even though all of us is sort of imported to this place to get this master's degree, we all each ended up doing projects that were very deeply rooted in the countries that we came from. So I decided to do a project, of course, focused around African-American culture. And I started with the big question of, what does African-American architecture look like? And then after digging a little bit deeper, thinking like, well, it's not one note, right? Just like African-Americans as people and everybody as people and as part of their culture, it's very dynamic. So the idea that you would have something that's a representation of a culture and kind of stamp it with that seemed a little bit false to me. So then I had to take a step back and I said, well, what if I work on a thesis that explores designing a process? And through that process, because of the way that you would work to get to the design, the product inherently would be something that was African-American. So that's kind of what I did in that program. But I think the interesting thing that I want to mention about that is when I went there to present to my professors, and I know Udo talked about the review process and things like that. I had 3 professors. One was Iranian, one was Palestinian, and the other was Pakistani. And I talked to them about my response to the African-American culture within the context of architecture. And they, because they weren't American, actually asked me a really great question. What am I responding to? How do you characterize and define African-American culture that yields this particular response? And to me, this was incredibly mind-blowing, just because I realized that I had assumed all of the sort of unwritten values and narratives that are associated with African-American culture, living in the US my whole life, without actually taking the time. I had to go across the ocean to take the time to actually define it for myself. And so what I found was that I got an opportunity to actually reclaim the narrative of what it means to be me, to be an African-American in this space, designing architecture. What does that mean? And what are those points? So I ended up doing a project called Confrontations in Gray. So to kind of start to break down that sort of polarization of Black and white. And explore all of those wonderful, unique spaces in between that I think are characteristic of African Americans. So anyway, I wrapped that up, and I had the incredible fortune, after I returned back to the United States, of working with Phil Freelon at the Freelon Group. So there was really, again, I call it an incredible fortune, because I was very concerned that I did all of this investigative study and fell in love with the way that culture impacts architecture and design, and thought I might just go into practice where it was just kind of, you know, independent of that. So I was really, really fortunate that I got this opportunity with Phil to work on the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Motown Museum in Detroit, and other Black cultural projects. And now, as an associate with Vines Architecture, it's great. I have the opportunity to lead projects. And one of the favorite ones that I'm leading right now is actually a building that Johns Hopkins University is planning to do in honor of Henrietta Lacks, who is an African-American woman considered the mother of modern medicine. So all that said, I just want to summarize really quickly because I know I've got 4 minutes. Thank you. I just wanted to say, I think, you know, through my academic and professional career, you know, it's easy to say, you know, let's talk about racism in architecture and how that's impacted you. But I think for me, there's really kind of like 3 big isms that I have to work on navigating, you know, at various points in my academic and my professional career. And that is racism. And I have, you know, I think everybody kind of has their experiences and stories, but, you know, I have had the situation where my salary was corrected. And, you know, where there was interesting things about bringing, you know, offensive content to the attention of someone, but then, you know, having to walk the line of not implying that that person is a racist. Trying to address the action without the person and all of that. So navigating that professionally. I have had to navigate sexism where, you know, you're starting out in the profession, you're a young lady and there's the assumption that you're pushed more in the interior design of things. And being the only sort of intern architect that is constantly signing in with a senior interior designer and having to advocate to just be able to do the wall sections. And then also even along those same veins, you know, being pregnant, having a baby, and, you know, through my pregnancy, having to convince a former employer that, you know, that I was going to work. I was going to work until my due date and I was going to come back after my maternity leave, and just having to make that extra effort to convince them. I ended up getting a new job during maternity leave, by the way. And then the third one I would say is more recent, and it's ageism. You know, I have always been very ambitious and very goal driven. And so I just tried to, you know, hit the marks early. So I got licensed as soon as I could. I've always taken on more than I needed to because I just am very passionate about architecture and design and about practice. And so with the ageism, I have a current employer that really embraces all that I have to offer. And as such, he puts me as one of the younger people in the firm as a leader of projects. And so with that comes, you know, the perceptions, sometimes from clients more so, that can she handle this? She looks a little young, you know, this young lady, does she have this ability, that sort of thing. So those are the sort of 3 isms. And I know a lot of times people refer to them as barriers, but I think in the way that I have been brought up and the way that I have to think about them is more like obstacles. And I think language and as visual thinkers, that's really important because a barrier in my mind is more of a, you know, it's like sort of this wall, endless in both directions and maybe far up. And it's something that you constantly have to come up against, and you're negotiating your existence with this barrier. And so I have to think of these isms as obstacles that I have the ability to kind of go above and around and beneath and through. And in that, you know, again, just to try to create an experience where I am navigating and not, or overcoming and not negotiating. So.
Thank you so much. Such amazing perspectives all around, valuable insight from so many experiences. And I think as the chat shows, everyone is very thankful for you all taking the step and sharing those experiences. And so we'll start out with one question. Not everyone has to answer this, but we'll start out with this one, and then hopefully everyone in the chat, feel free to add in your questions. So does someone want to take the question? What examples of colorblind racism do you see in the profession or in the academy? So where do you see colorblindness in the academy or profession? Do we have someone who wants to take it? Udo, I saw your face.
Okay. Well, first I want to ask, like, colorblind racism. What exactly does that mean?
You can either make an assumption or any question askers can clarify if they're interested.
Okay, I'll just make an assumption. I just feel like the term colorblind doesn't make any sense because obviously you see color. It's very simple. Unless you're actually colorblind, then sorry, didn't mean to offend you. But yeah, there's no such thing as colorblind racism. It's either you're racist or you're not, or like you're prejudiced or you're not. There is ignorance though. If you're ignorant to your actions, then you're just ignorant. But I feel personally that, you know, a lot of times there are microaggressions that people, you know, they don't know that what they're saying is offensive or like what they're doing is offensive, but it is. And like it can be taken as offensive by, you know, people of color. I guess like one example for me would be the summer of my senior year, I had an internship at SOM, and there was this one day when they got all of the interns together for like a lunch and learn. That's what they called it, a lunch and learn. So we were all getting our food and like sat down to listen to this guy lecture about, I think he was an engineer, but he was talking about like entropy and like scientific stuff. And he asked us a question about like something that I didn't know about. And like I was the only one who didn't raise my hand because first of all, I was a sophomore, like right out of high school. So everybody else was like in their graduate program in college. So like everyone else is raising their hand. And I guess he thought it would be funny to like pick on me because I was the only one who didn't raise my hand. And yeah, it was like something, I honestly don't even remember the question, but like he was telling me, it's okay, you're young, you'll probably learn about it in whatever school you go to. Oh, matter of fact, where are you from? I was like, I'm from America. Thank you. So I feel like that's, you know, a little microaggression. He probably was curious as to where I was from because I said my name was Udo, and that's a very uncommon name, but like I didn't have an accent or anything. So it was kind of odd for him to, number one, pick on me because that's a little bit of ageism. You know, Rashay, I hear you, girl. A little bit of ageism. And just, you know, a little bit of racism, just a tiny bit. So, you know, microaggressions, macroaggressions, thank you, Cruz. Yeah, they hit different. And, you know, I'm one person who will call you out on that. And I feel like a lot of people don't realize what they're doing is offensive. So, you know, they keep doing it. And if you do it to the wrong person, it can be, you know, bad. So, yeah.
Well, I think that answers that. Thank you for the personal experience. Definitely appreciate you sharing. We're going to switch to another, definitely going more into the institution world. So knowing that the institutional context of most programs works very slowly, what are the most appropriate solutions for permanently expanding the number of faculty of color broadly? Emily, I know you specifically noted this, so do you want to take a first crack at it?
Sure. I think that, and this, it's not exactly colorblind racism, but I think that when we talk about colorblindness, one of the things, particularly when it comes to faculty hiring, is approaching experience with a diverse viewpoint. So one of the things that we have to understand is, particularly when we're talking about systemic racism and systemic institutionalized racism, it's important to remember that a diverse faculty is going to come to the table with a diverse breadth of experience. And so it's part of that, to me, is valuing experiences by our faculty candidates or our even staff and administration candidates that may be different than what you are used to typically seeing in terms of what a CV is and, you know, the firms that they've worked at and all of this. So it's remembering that some of, you know, what our faculty brings to the table should not be the same thing that everyone else is, you know, that the rest of the faculty is bringing to the table. And so I think that that's one way of increasing diversity in the faculty, is valuing differing experiences. And also, I think, you know, like I said, the institutional process is very slow. And for me, like I said in my opening statement, increasing diversity in our faculty and in our instruction and architectural education has to start with the way that we treat and that we foster growth in our students. So I've heard multiple times that the diverse faculty pool is very shallow, and it's really hard to kind of make these hires. So that tells me as a student affairs professional that means we need to increase our diverse student population, and we need to increase the retention of our diverse student population in education. So that's, and while that is not a short-term solution, it is something that to be able to respond to the need, we have to start at the roots. So.
Fantastic. Carmita, do you want to weigh in on that as well?
Yes, I wanted to add that sometimes when we're searching, we create these boxes that are very generic. And certainly we have formulas. In a way, they are embedded formulas for searching for faculty. But, and we say that the pool is shallow because we always go to the same pools. We always go to the same pools. But those people, and that happens also with hiring women. You have to actively recruit, number one. And number two, if the environment in the school is toxic and there's not much that one can do where you are, people are not going to apply. I mean, toxic and you cannot do much, that's like suicide.
Absolutely, and it definitely, echoing Ryan's question, which I will also pose as a question to you all, can we blame the admission process for being responsible for the lack of minorities in the profession? I went to a community school for my first 2 years, and there was more minority students there than where the admission office was. Yeah, can we blame the admission process? Where do you see this laying for all of you in your experiences?
I mean, to me, yes, absolutely. In the same way that we can kind of blame the lack of diverse expectations of our faculty candidates, I think that we should always question the expectations of students of institutions and what they expect from students. Access to education, again, has a systemic root in institutionalized racism. And for a school to place more of an emphasis on standardized test scores, high school GPA, high school rank, than they do on the actual students themselves, the students' experiences, what they bring to the table. Even something simple as prioritizing portfolio work in the actual admission status of a student. Again, it goes back to not valuing or not placing lived experiences or adverse experience at the forefront. So I currently work at an institution that has a pretty low acceptance rate, and the standardized, what is the oh my gosh, the SAT rate and high school GPA rate is like, the averages are through the roof. And so what about the students who can't afford to take all of these SAT prep courses? What about those students who weren't able to go to these like AP driven high schools? So where are they?
Absolutely. I'll hand it off to Udo, and then Verche, I'm going to get you in there as well. If you have any insights from your experiences as a student, as well as a professional lens on this question, and then we'll get into it more, of course.
I guess from a student perspective, I remember when I was applying to colleges in high school, like our college counselors, I was like from one of those AP driven schools, like SAT prep schools, that kind of stuff. So I kind of knew what to do in order to get into college, but it was a matter of picking the right college for me. And a lot of times when you're talking to a minority student, you'll hear kind of the same story, like, oh, everyone told me I should go to a community college first and then go on to a 4-year because it's cheaper and, I'll get all my gen eds out the way and blah, 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 blah. So like right from the jump, you're already discouraged from entering a 4-year university. And then even after you make the decision to enter a 4-year university, then they're always going to question, oh, are you sure you want to do engineering? Are you sure you want to do architecture? Are you sure you want to do biology? Are you sure this is for you? So, it's hard, trying to get your applications together. Then you need like 20 million letters of recommendation. Now you have to sit down and write 20 million essays. And just the admissions process in general is kind of dumb to me. I feel like you should just do an interview and be like, okay, I want to do architecture. They'll ask you why, you'll chat for a little bit, and then boom, you get into college. That's my opinion. And then also you have to find money. That's a whole nother thing, like scholarships, grants, loans. It's very hard to try and figure all that out at like 16? It's ridiculous. So yeah, a lot of people kind of just pick the easier route, which is probably, community college closer to home, that's cheaper. And, they can still work while they're in school, because in the back of your mind, like if you're a minority student coming from, a low income area, we live in a capitalist society. So money is always going to be at the back of your mind. And yeah, like that's how I even decided to go to school. I went where the money was. If I was getting a bigger scholarship here, then this is where I went. So
yeah, I will just piggyback off of that. I've worked with middle and high school students to kind of teach them about architecture, just in general. Because even knowing that it's an option as a career sometimes, and particularly in the local communities here for students of color, is not something that they've considered. So, in alluding to increasing that pipeline, there's definitely work to do. But I think to piggyback off of what Udo was saying, the whole application process of getting into architecture school and then the study of architecture is very, very unique. I'm not sure that there is actually another major on a campus that I can think of that can be characterized in the same way and requires the same amount of, of navigation and sacrifice and knowledge, and the knowledge that you need to know going into what you're about to experience. It's almost otherworldly. So for the admissions process, when you're, again, talking to a 16, 17-year-old and, they fill out the college application, they take the tests, right? But then it's like, oh, should I have taken these drafting courses in high school because I really like, architecture, so someone told me to take drafting. But then I heard I need this portfolio that talks more about art, and they don't care about the drafting. And then what is a portfolio? What does that look like? And then when I interview, I'm supposed to learn how to talk through that and present that in some way, and then the judgment is made. And then, it kind of carries on and through into, again, what I think can be, if you're not exposed to it, if you don't not exposed to it, and you don't walk through it, and you don't know someone that did it, it's such a unique and specific experience that you have, it's almost, it can be very divisive. So I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. Some big remarks there, and a lot for us to think about. And I'm going to keep on going with that direction. And I think this next question kind of gets at a few that are in the chat. But what do you see as the mechanisms, the practices, and the habits, practices, and habits that uphold white supremacist attitudes about architecture? So those are a few areas. And I know, Rochelle, you had some isms that you were talking about that are part of that too. Does anyone, I won't call on anyone first for this one.
I'll start. So you said in architecture in general, or education, or it was general?
It was general, but you can narrow it to architecture education if you want to.
Okay. Well, the teaching of history and theory in studio, the principles for design. I mean, I love the 10 books of Virtubrius. I definitely like the machine one, but we really need to be more expansive. And when we talk about the beginning of the city, well, the city is a thing that is like 10 years, 10,000 years old. But we always go to the same beginning, and I don't even have to mention it. And I think it's in all of your minds right now, where the city started. I'll just say Agora.
I guess I can jump in. I just think, like Carmina said, theory and history is gotta go. Everything needs to be scratched. Honestly, so help me God, if I learn one more thing about Le Corbusier, it's ridiculous. We learn so much about white males. We're literally, it's just like, I'm such a big advocate for this, because not me having to sit in class and not connect with anything that I'm learning. Like, I don't connect with any of the people that we learn, the theory that we learn. Okay, sure. Like, I end up using it in my model just because it's natural. Like, I use it in my designs because it's a natural way to design. But, you know, us coining these individuals as geniuses, as innovators of their field, like, their time has passed. Let it rest. Let it rest. Like, we can move on. There's so much that we don't know. And we're in this age of like, what is it, sustainability and like eco-friendly building, blah, 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 blah. Y'all, this all came from Africa. Come on, like, we could do better. We can do better. There's so much that we're just forgetting is there. And there's an entire continent, an entire world, mind you, an entire world. It's not just America and Europe. It's not just that. I don't know anything about Asia. I love Asia. Like, I would love to learn so much more about Asia. I don't know a thing. I don't know a thing. I'm Nigerian myself. I don't know a thing other than what's going on in Nigeria. The entire continent of Africa, like the biggest continent in the world, I don't know anything that's going on there. I don't know the history, like what building technique that they used. And it's crazy because that's the thing that we're looking for. Like, that's what we're looking for. And in the past summer, I did an internship with CPDI Africa, and I researched traditional building techniques of Igbo architecture. Mostly I did it for myself because I'm Igbo, and like, I personally am very interested in like my own personal history. But there's so many answers that I learned while doing this research. And it's like 10 weeks. It took me 10 weeks to figure it out. And we've been doing this for how many hundreds of years? Come on, guys. Come on. So yeah, I think education, we gotta think about what we're not teaching, not what we are teaching, because it's been taught. We know it. We've learned it. I learned this stuff in high school. I don't need to know it now. Okay. And yeah, just the Bauhaus model is racist. Just throwing that out there. And we can talk about that a different day. You guys can hit me up. We can talk about that a different day. We don't have the time for that. But there's just so much in theory and in history that we learn that is technically racist if you think about it, but we just don't have the time to delve into that. So I digress. But yes, theory and history gotta go.
Yeah, I think that I think you're absolutely right as far as, you know, each building historically, it conveys some sort of meaning. It is built for a purpose. You know, aesthetically, it's to give certain impressions and to leave a certain impact and imprint, not just on the physical site, but on the community that it represents. And so I think some of the things that need to be, I guess, torn down that keep those things in place, you know, design and the way that we do architecture in practice, you know, claims to be a very collaborative process, right? And that's one of those sort of buzzwords that, you know, just like sustainability and all of that, very important things, but collaboration is one of those, you know, design buzzwords that we like to use in the way that buildings happen. What's interesting is, you know, it's not something that is taught and celebrated in school as much, I don't think, as far as the way that studios are set up to kind of do individual projects. And just kind of, you know, assign the grade to a person singularly, because in practice, every building happens because of a team. But then also when you translate that into practice, again, when we talk about the diversity of the team and who we're bringing to the table, everyone is bringing their own unique set of experiences and their own voice. And it's not just always about what you were taught in school. A lot of times people want to do architecture, and then some of the things that end up infusing themselves back into the foundation of what's being designed really comes from a personal experiential place. And so I think that that's where we have to realize that when we don't make the active effort to diversify and to expand the perspectives and the experiences around the table in order to generate something that's supposed to serve a community, which again is not a singular sort of one-liner for how you define that, then that's how those systems kind of continue to be upheld. So I don't know, it's sort of that chicken and the egg question, right? Because everything's sort of, well, the profession, and then it falls back to school, and then it falls back to what happens before school. But we really need to aggressively and actively tackle those issues head on.
Absolutely. Emily, were you going to get in there as well?
My comment was essentially saying I 100% agree with both Carmena and Udo in terms of, again, diversifying the voices that we teach in our curriculum, from history theory to the precedent projects we use in Architecture Studio, encouraging, again, this understanding of various perspectives and what those various perspectives bring to the table, like Brochet was saying, and really just just like popping that white male bubble, I think is one of the, that's got to be the first step, especially when, if we think about a direct reflection of a student body in the precedents or the primary architects that the student body studies, if you made like a percentage comparison, there would be absolutely no reflection again. So our curriculum does not reflect the people who are learning it. And that is incredibly problematic.
Absolutely. Yeah. As we're talking about these structures in place that create the situation we're in, and we get those conversations of chicken and egg, but reality is that we just all need to be doing better. And I think we've definitely identified some really key structures here, and habits. And I wanted to go back to this question that Alexis posed, kind of in conjunction with these last points that have been made. So we recognize some of the mechanisms, these habits, but now how can architecture programs be more empathetic, right? A lot of these things you're saying, to be more service-based is to be empathetic and to foster this. But first, how do we walk the walk? How can architecture programs be more empathetic and set up a structure that can support students once they arrive? And this was kind of part of that conversation of like admitting diverse students isn't the the first and last step. It's the first step. But how do we make these programs more empathetic? Does anyone have any thoughts on this one?
I do. If I don't really want to go first, if someone else does, but
I can go first.
Oh, thank you.
I think like you said, admitting the students is the first step. Retention is always, the second step, trying to retain the numbers that you obtain. And I honestly think it's just a matter of putting in the work, because even like now that we're talking about curriculum, like what can we change with the curriculum? What can we change what we're teaching? This has been the same curriculum that they've been using since they established architecture as like an education, or like when they established architecture school to be taught. And, recycling the same thing, it's easier. It is. And, it's a little uncomfortable when you have to have these discussions about race and like equality and, power dynamics and struggles and so on and so forth. But if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not doing it right. Like, it's 2020. We know so much more than we did then. And it's about time that we just did the work to check our privilege, to make sure everybody is comfortable. And it's very simple. Like, honestly, like I said, it took me 10 weeks to learn about, you know, stuff in Nigeria. It's not like people aren't doing these things already. You know, it's really simple just to go out and be like, okay, who's interested in teaching this at my school? You'll get like 20 million messages because people want the opportunities to share their stories, to say what they need to say. And you know, like I said, ignorance is bliss, but it's time to stop being ignorant. It's time to go out there and just put in that little work to educate ourselves and to, you know, ask people to come to our schools and give lectures, ask people to come to our schools and host studios, ask people to come to our schools and be tenured professors who teach this over and over and over again, because you can't teach the same thing forever. That doesn't make any sense.
Go ahead, Carmina.
Yeah, I don't think that we're teaching the same things over and over. I have been teaching for 31 years and I have to tell you that there's been changes. Certainly there's some areas that seem to be frozen, and I do agree with you, because so many of just recent things, so many of my students want to know about passive ways of dealing with the environment, techniques for ventilation. And there's a handful of books that deal with that. So there's a lot of research that needs to be done, that is historical research, but also about what is done in vernacular architecture. There's people working on that. But we're talking about how the system can be changed, right? That's what we're talking about, how to change the system. So I teach in a school that has open admission. So that's not necessarily the issue. Yes, SAT scores and GPA, but there's no interview, there's no portfolio. But then the thing is, you go through the system and you have to do an internship. You have to do portfolio again. And there's gazillion understandings of what this portfolio should have. And each firm seems to be looking for a differently tailored student. And that's a barrier right there. So I think that one of the things that needs to be worked out is precisely that connection with the practice, with the internship. Because, well, certainly we could do the work without license. That is possible. Dangerous, but possible. Or you do projects that are not more than $150,000, depending on the state where you are. But if it's going to open, we need to think about the connection between academia and practice.
And if I could, I'd like to address, so with Alexis's question about or statement that just admitting a diverse student body is, you know, that's just the start. Supporting students and retaining these students in architectural education is that's the tough work. And as a student affairs professional, my response to how do we do that is definitely from a perspective of supporting our students with auxiliary programming, supporting our students with or paying attention to the outside of the classroom experience that students are going through, and developing student support programs that meet a variety of needs. One set of programs that I think is imperative for almost all schools of architecture to have is a bridge program. So a bridge program connects students that are in high school to architectural education, exposes them to what a studio environment is like. It provides them with some social capital to understand, like Rashay was saying, about the application process, what it means to put together a portfolio, how you talk about your work. So bridge programs that connect students in high school to architecture programs are, I think, one of the best ways to start with increasing diverse population, as well as having schools prioritize financial aid with a diverse lens in place. So oftentimes financial aid is used to recruit the best and the brightest students, the highest achieving ones, highest test score ones. But you will potentially see in your school that those highest achieving students that score like through the roof on their SATs, they're not always the ones that are like magically retained at the school. So sometimes those mid-level students are the ones that actually had the highest retention rates. So refocusing scholarship and financial aid programs to target more of a middle, you'll actually see, or you could, I'm not going to say you will, you could actually see higher retention rates. But while students are in school, ensuring that there are support programs in place for first generation college students, for ensuring that you have student organizations that are paying attention, like student organizations like NOMAS, National Organization of Minority Architecture Students, that provide a community within this larger community to, again, it increases social capital for our students. And then the final point is one that just slipped my mind. Again, having someone in a position in your program that is there to advocate and meet the needs of students. I think that this is something, because I've been doing this for about 10 years, but my role is not, there are a few other architecture programs out there that would have a position like mine. So I think that, again, paying attention to knowing our students, who they are, what they need, and how this outside of the class time support can impact in-class knowledge.
I would just add to that too. From the professional side, I think the need continues. After people enter into architecture, and there's different things, we call them pinch points. So I serve on the Women in Architecture in the Triangle area as one of the leaders of that group, and really trying to figure out a way to create a supportive network or a local community of women that can help propel each other. First of all, there's shared experiences, right? That you go through in a profession that wasn't in its foundation built to support you as you go through some even gendered experiences like pregnancy. And so having a group where you can have those discussions and then learn from people's experiences about how they've navigated, I think is incredibly valuable. That's the space that NOMA is also in as far as the support of minority architects. But then when we talk about dismantling that or rethinking that, I think that's something that needs to be done. And when it comes down to is, you have to be, and I guess with the power, you have to be in a position in order to kind of break those systems down to say, we need to do something different. And I don't know, again, as if you look at the statistics, as women move through the profession, the number or the amount of representation as you go further up in your career decreases. And so the level of advocacy as someone has a longer standing career and potentially gets to that point, that pool narrows and narrows. So we kind of have the problem at the top of the pyramid too, I think. But anyway, I guess it's more of a question, but it's something that we have to get in there and address. Who has the power to actually kind of enforce these policies? And it's on a firm level, it's on an organization level, all of that. And then, I don't know, just how do we break that down? How do we rethink that? And I always ask, it is different. Like, why we are in a profession where when you do sort of normal things in living life, and I keep referencing motherhood because my son is 2.5, so it all feels still very new for me. But it was interesting to be living through this moment where I had to, like, it was a space that all of a sudden I wasn't welcome in anymore almost. And I had to work and create a path there. And I have a wonderful mentor and someone named Terry Canada, who I say often talks me off a cliff. But when, Emily is talking about these support systems to help guide you through and push through all of the, not just, you know, the work and the wanting to be an outstanding architect and the crazy hours that sometimes continue into practice, but also just, you know, those life things that intersect it. You absolutely need those sounding boards for support, because when you don't have them, I've seen it many times. I have many peers where they decide to go. So, which is a terrible, terrible loss to the architecture community.
Absolutely. And we have an amazing question here that I think speaks to the amount of weight that is already on our shoulders to work through this moment that we're in and have been since, you know, as we're kind of looking inward, looking at, you know, how do we fix our house? How do we clean our house? But the foundation isn't set right. But this question, and if you have any thoughts on the how of this, someone would like to know, how can we step away from this quota mentality, right? Where diversity is the first step, but we're not just here to achieve numbers. How can we step away from the quota mentality and how the responsibility of uplifting communities of color rests on those same people of color? How are white people planning to educate themselves and get better at being an architect for everyone and not just people that look like them? So this is definitely a how do we move away from, you know, these mindsets? Because, right, we said there's alignment with where we need to be talking about diversity, but we need to be talking about it in the right way. And who should this weight be on? And right now, of course, there's this sense that it's on our people of color. It is on our communities to get them out of this situation. But, you know, it wasn't built for them to do that. So I know that's a huge question, and how, if you have any personal experiences or thoughts on what could move the needle here, would be really fascinated to hear.
I think I have a sort of initial thought in response to this. I've done a bit of thinking about this, and I think part of it, just quite simply, is taking the engagement and the idea of a people and of a culture from a concept to a reality. I would say the part of the key, and I think we talked about this when we all met earlier this week, is you know, everyone's a person. So to have the conversation, to get to know someone, and not just start with, let's solve the problem, but like, let's genuinely get to know you as a person, you know? And then when that starts to break down, like it breaks it down from this big issue to be addressed. I mean, culture is not an issue, just like, you know, and we already moved beyond the colorblind conversation, but culture is not a problem to be solved, right? It's something that each of us, you know, can make an effort to engage someone that is not like us, and actually more than someone, right? It's kind of our responsibility to get to know people that, as architects even, people that are not like us, people that are like us, and everything in between. And so I think when we can start to humanize things, then the solutions can probably come about in a more organic way. I would not venture to say here is you know, this step-by-step plan to how things get done, but I think a first step that would be greatly appreciated by, as a person of color, at least by me, is someone just making a genuine attempt to get to know me and to understand my experiences, because that's what I bring to people. That's what you have to bring to people when you're the minority in a space. So just that equal level of respect and intention and personhood would be, I think, a great first step.
Mic drop moment. Consider it answered. I do. I think that this is a really good pivot point into another question that kind of shifts us from looking inward and looking outward again. So we have a question here, and you can, if you have thoughts on the previous one, you can kind of tie them in here as well. What do you see as the limits of the political power of architects and architecture students in affecting meaningful anti-racist structural change? So, these are, again, big questions, but I think if you have thoughts on the last one, you can definitely move there as well. And Udo, I'd love your perspective as a student organizer, someone who's out there sharing the message, proud and strong.
I guess I would say, I don't know, limits. I don't really want to say that there should be any limits to it, just because, as a minority, like, I don't find it like super fun all the time. So like have to justify everything that I do, like justify why I want to do this, why I want to do that, justify why this is hurtful to me, or like why this makes me uncomfortable. So I personally think it's just a matter of checking biases, like for me personally, I can't say that I understand how white people look at me because I'm not a white person. Like I don't know what I look like from their perspective. So there's a disconnect there. Like I think, I'm just a human being, but like obviously there's some bias that comes with interacting with me as a Black female. So, if we want to dismantle this entire system, number one, we have to recognize that there is a system of oppression, that there is systemic racism. Like some people want to deny that, but there is. And number two, we have to educate ourselves on where our, power is. So, obviously white males have a lot of power, white females have a lot of power. There's a power struggle all the time in academia, in the professional field or whatever. And, you have to recognize that as well. And then number three, you have to understand like where your bias is coming from, because people like to think that like architecture isn't political, but like if you're working at a big firm and you're designing for a Black neighborhood and you're just, putting this really nice building there and you think your design looks really nice, but you're not thinking about like how that design is affecting the people in that community. So there's a lot that goes into it. I think there should be education on intersectionalities first and foremost, because that's really what it boils down to. Like there are so many different things that make up one human being. And if we don't understand those different things and how our actions can affect somebody because of those things, then we're just never gonna reach consensus on this. But I don't think there's one straight answer. Like I just gave like 20 million answers to 20 different questions, and there's no straight answer to it. It's a very hard question, and it's gonna be something that we all have to work towards, but you have to put in the work, and that's the first step. Or fifth step. I don't really know what step I'm on anymore, but yeah.
Thank you so much. Carmina, I see you're ready.
Well, yes, and I could have said that for the previous one, but I think that I teach in an HBCU, in a school of architecture, in an HBCU, department. We are good models to look at. Tuskegee has been doing this for a long time. Perhaps it's the first school that was doing design build. And our mission has been precisely to bring students from underrepresented communities. So we have been doing it for a while, and we have shaped our curriculums to that. And we have had to be open, and we have, I'm talking now at Hampton, we have students of different ages. We have the same demographics as other schools where there's now 50% women. We have a demographic that is unequal, I think, by any other program, and that is that we're 7 faculty, of which 4 are women. I don't think you have that in any program in the United States. And 5 are licensed architects. Anyway, that forget about that part, scratch that. The point is about providing a model for breaking down structures. You can see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Come talk to us, and there might be other programs outside. That's
I would like to propose that we need more conversations like this, but interdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, but also interinstitution conversations about these issues in architectural education, in architecture curriculum, and how we as the academy can begin to come to a consensus about kind of breaking these structures down. So, perhaps that is a conference where this is the main topic. Perhaps it's a series of conversations amongst deans, amongst tenured faculty. So more and more and more conversations about ways that institutions can address all of these conversations, and how institutions may have to be uncomfortable in these conversations. That was something that someone pointed out to me when I was in grad school. I made the comment about, not feeling like I not feeling okay and having these discussions. And this colleague was like, that's the point. You have to sit in your uncomfortableness to really face the issues that you're bringing to the table. So I think that many uncomfortable conversations are necessary.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I would agree. I was in a conversation about this, something around this last week, and someone opened it up with, this is really awkward. And I encouraged them to kind of change their language as I appreciated their honesty. But, with reference to, as the minority coming to the table, it's very exciting to see a group that's open to this, right? And having these conversations. But I do want to sort of asterisk this with the balance of, these conversations are really important to be had at all of these levels. However, I think there also needs to be more than one representative space at the table to do the action of other things. So don't just invite me to, have a conversation specifically targeted around EDI, or equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice. And then, everything else that is actually the development, the initiatives, what's propelling things forward, what's engaged and plugged in to all of these different things, like it's this sort of separate thing. And a way it has the potential to hold this over here accountable, but really the issue is that those spaces need to open up, and they need to open up for the more than just one or two people. And so that way, when someone is coming to the table, they are contributing to I am who I am. I bring what I bring, but I also have informed opinions about other topics and other items within the expertise and field of insert thing here. So I have personally kind of come to that realization after I got licensed. I guess to get licensed, you just shut the world out and try to do it. But then after that, and thinking about how can I start to navigate and work in spaces and be present, and not be present to say I've got to champion Black people in this space, but to just be present and say I have something, as I am who I am, and I have something effectively to contribute, just like my peer who doesn't look like me, that's valuable and worth hearing at the same time. So again, found some of that in AIA, involvement with NOMA, and then I've actually moved on to the Raleigh Historic Development Commission, because that's a space where we're in defense of the historic urban environment. And so being at the table where people are proposing cases, and you're again doing the work but bringing your different experience to that. We are now tackling talks around gentrification and talks around historic landmarks that were owned historically by white supremacists, and do they lose their landmark designation? Are they still architecturally relevant? And it's interesting to get the eyes in the room kind of looking at you waiting to hear what you're going to say, but at the same time, it's nice, because as much as there's a focus and a conversation at that, I'm still at the table when we have to talk about the addition to a home that's in a historic overlay district and is a respectful. And so just being included in all of the pie, I guess, and not just kind of like a specific slice is going to be key in starting to dismantle these things.
Such a fantastic set of responses that show you how much work needs to be done in how many spaces, all of them, all of the work. I want to do a lightning round before we hand it off to kind of get wrapped up. But lightning round, kind of list them out if you want, or just have one. But what are the most urgent changes that you would like to see occur in the academy or the profession, et cetera, in architecture? The most urgent changes, lightning round, go. We'll start with Udo.
I would say first and foremost, some curriculum changes. Obviously, you've already heard my rant about theory and history, and also studio culture. That can definitely stand to change a bit. And yeah, admission process, all that, gotta rethink everything.
Thanks so much. Carmina.
I think it's important to work with the communities where we are, bring people different from us to collaborate with the students. That is essential. Not everybody is doing it. Certainly COVID, we need to come together again. We need COVID vaccine to be together because our work is so dependent on that interaction. I think we're like in an hiatus. I mean, I'm talking too much.
Good lightning round. Emily?
So for me, that is reprioritization of financial aid and what that looks like for incoming students. Kind of recentering what we see our bridge programs as, what we see the kind of the priority in our bridge programs, as well as I think that every school of architecture in the country should have a diversity, inclusion, and equity committee. So.
And Riche.
What I want to see immediately probably can't happen immediately, but I would love to see the cross-section of employees at different architecture firms across the country in practice just become much more diverse than what they are. I think it can be easy to have a singular person that gets pushed up to the top. I think it can be easy to try to get, sort of an entry level group of staff that's of a diverse background, but really when you cut across all that is the experience of moving through architecture and looking at practice, I would love to see, diversity and, in all that means represented throughout.
Amazing, amazing set of priorities here. And I can't wait to see it all done. I do want to hand it off and say quickly, thank you to our panelists. I feel like my cup is flowing over with the amount of experiences and just really amazing insight. So thank you for having me and letting me be part of your amazing conversation. And I will hand it back to our Education Committee Chair, Alexis, to round us out. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes, and thank you very much, Sarah, for being a great moderator. And thank you to the panelists for a wonderful discussion. Thank you to all of the attendees as well for joining us and for the great conversation in the chat and for asking questions of our panelists. We hope you enjoyed tonight's panel discussion, and the Education Committee would also like to announce that next semester we will be developing an online resource of educational materials based on this panel and the committee's specific charge on power dynamics and racial equity. So please stay tuned, as there will soon be an announcement about this early next semester. Thank you again, and we hope you had a wonderful evening.